Today, Mark and Steve are here to talk about ISO standards and changes that we can expect, and also, different aspects of quality management that they see being affected in 2025 and beyond. Maybe Steve and Mark, if you want to introduce yourselves.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Steve Gompertz. I'm one of the two founding partners with Mark of QRx Partners. We're a kind of a boutique consulting agency based in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, focusing on quality and regulatory needs, particularly for small to medium and early stage companies in the med tech space. So both on the device and the pharma space. Myself, I've been in the med tech industry for over 30 years now, with a variety of companies of all different sizes, shapes, and device classifications. And then actually, the way Mark and I met was we both also teach at St. Cloud State University here in the Twin Cities, where they have master's degree programs in med tech quality, regulatory, and clinical affairs.
And as Steve said, Steve and I founded QRx Partners together. My start in the med tech was with Medtronic. Spent about 12 years there in basically all the different roles in quality. Started to pick up some regulatory pieces. Went out, been consulting now for about the same amount of time, about 12 years, a little more. Steve and I started QRx 4.5 years ago. And we've been working since then. Since I left Medtronic, I've been on the ISO working groups. So on ISO 13485, some of the risk management pieces, including 31,000, 14971, and then ISO 9000 and 9001 as well in the 2015 edition and the coming editions that are coming in 25 and 26.
I'd love to jump in to kind of a high-level overview of those ISO standards, for our audience. How are the standards created? Who creates them? How are they created? How often are they revised?
ISO standards are developed by that organization, the International Standards Organization. So ISO is the piece. There's other standards development organizations. The International Electroconnectivity, IEC. In the US, we have our own standards development. So we have the American National Standards Institute. We have AAMI, the Association for Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. We have ASQ, the American Society for Quality. All of those organizations develop some standards. Generally, they get developed by a national organization and then brought to the international level. And so ISO, it's an international working group, 97 countries, I think, that are organized into ISO. And each is able to appoint their experts to the ISO working groups. So I serve alongside a few other American people in the U.S. delegations for these pieces. Once the standard is developed, and it's usually a 3-year development cycle before it's published. So they go through a working draft stage, a committee draft stage, then they do a DIS or draft industry standard, and then they get a published standard. And so it takes about 3 years to get through that process. Sometimes we say it's, like watching paint dry. It feels like it moves very slowly, and then other times it feels like it's moving quickly as we go through the editing and commenting and then resolving comments and that whole process. And then once the standard is published, the standard, what they call systematic review, or SR, that SR is every 5 years. So every standard is reviewed every 5 years for that systematic review. And all of the participating organizations get a ballot in that systematic review, and then they determine the outcome of that. The outcome can be just to simply reconfirm it. No changes needed, that kind of stuff can go on. It could be to revise the standard. And so then it goes back into that almost 3-year cycle. It can be a 2 or 3-year cycle at that point to revise it. Or they can just say, you know what, that standard just doesn't work anymore, and we're going to withdraw it. And so sometimes they will withdraw that standard. What we've seen in ISO 9000 and 9001, is that they've chosen to do those revisions. And so right now, both ISO 9000 and 9001 are undergoing that revision cycle. But the systematic review for ISO 13485 in the med device space is set to start in January of 2025. And that's a 6-month period for that systematic review. So between January and June, we'll be taking comments and ballots for that systematic review of ISO 13485.
So you had mentioned that there are going to be changes to ISO 9000, 9001 expected for 2025, 2026.
Yep.
Based on your experience so far, can you give us a little bit of insight of what you think will be the proposed changes or what we can expect?
Big part of 9000 is the fundamentals and principles, those things that go across all quality management standards. And so what you're going to see is the fundamental concepts. In the 2015 edition, there's, I think, 5 or 6. In the coming publication, likely to be the end of 2025, that's going to go to about 20 fundamentals, explaining concepts like risk-based thinking in more detail in ISO 9000. So I think that's going to become more important for many organizations as they look to, understanding what an integrated management system looks like for not just quality management, but environmental, information security, all of those other pieces that they're going to look to integrate with their overall management system. Those fundamentals and principles will be more important.
About the importance of 9000, what I see a lot is companies will figure out which standard or standards they need to, comply with or certify to. They'll have 9001 or, 14,000, whatever. And then I'll ask, do you have a copy of 9000? And they'll go, why would I want that? It's right, because they don't get certified to it. But as Mark just explained, it is the foundation for all of these. And if you're going to buy the standard, you should buy 9000 as well, right?
And it is what we call a normative reference, which means that all of the requirements of ISO 9000 apply to those other management systems as well. So when they use it as a normative reference, as 13485 does, all of those requirements apply as well. So those fundamentals need to be incorporated. So that's 9000. Again, to me, I see that as the granddaddy of all of these kind of management systems, with terminology, fundamentals, and the principles that are behind that. Okay. Then we can go into 9001. 9001, the driving factor for the revision happens to be something called the harmonized approach, high-level structure, depending on who you're talking to and what language they're using, which comes from the ISO directives. And so that sets kind of the framework for management system standards. And so there were some changes since the 2015 edition has been published, and those changes are driving much of the reason for the change. I think probably, to me, the biggest impact for organizations is going to be this concept of decoupling with risks and opportunities. So many organizations are, and you're familiar with the formal publication in 2015 of the risk-based thinking, in 1345 risk-based approach. And so a problem that comes in is a focus on risk or things that can go bad. And then organizations don't focus on the opportunities or the things that are in front of them that could be good. And so the idea is, if we make those two separate concepts, risk-based thinking and opportunity-based thinking, that will help organizations understand what they need to do in order to take advantage of potential opportunities that are there. And so I think that'll be one of the large concepts that people will take away from this revision. There's other minor things that are happening with the definitions that have changed in that harmonized approach, the high level structure. Those are really minor in nature. And then just explaining further some of the concepts and clarifying things, like the process approach, like risk-based thinking, like documented information. All of these things explaining those in a more clear manner, I think is a goal of the next edition.
All right. And then I know you said that for 13485, that 6-month cycle is going to begin next year.
Yeah.
But is there any thought as to what might be under review or what might need to change?
Well, so that's it. I mean, that's why I linked these two things that we just talked about. So 13485 does not follow that harmonized approach or high level structure. And so that's a big driving factor for many organizations as they work for an integrated management system. 1345 currently has a 8-clause structure, whereas the harmonized approach has a 10-clause structure. What ISO 9001 currently is on. And so many organizations have some difficulties in matching up the requirements because the clause structure is different. When you have the background and understanding of the thinking behind the standard, the intent, to me it's less difficult to do that for people that have been deeply involved, and maybe are more seasoned, I'll say. But it makes sense that maybe ISO 13485 could go to that harmonized approach or high level structure. The biggest problem with that, honestly, is some of the definitions and some of the, call it the soft language that's in that harmonized approach. Or concepts like an organization shall consider is in the harmonized approach, and it's hard to say, that how do you say somebody considered doing something when it's not actually written? And so I like to rely on records and documents for those types of things. And so that soft language of the harmonized approach can be difficult, along with the definitions that come with that harmonized approach are slightly different than the definitions in 13485, including things like complaint and those types of things are really might be difficult to digest. In this systematic review, it's probably unlikely at this point that we see a push to revise the standard. There's some people out there that will say we need to, and because of that structure, but most of us think that, and most of us are looking honestly for some stabilization of the standard, because we've seen so many changes with the European medical device regulation, and that whole kind of upset that created in the industry. In US here, we have the change happening between the current QS reg or quality system regulation to the quality management system regulation, where FDA is adopting ISO 13485 2016 by reference. And so they're basically saying, look, 1345 2016 gives all of the requirements that we need to outline. You see the QS reg going from subparts A through O, really long, to subparts A and B in the QMSR. This has kind of been a big push to reduce the amount of regulation and increase the amount of harmonization across the industry. And so having stability and doing that makes sense. Again, that's why I think people are probably going to resist making a revision at this point, so that we can maintain that stability. If that happens, we'd go through 2025, and it would be another 5-year period to do a standard systematic review. Not saying that it couldn't be revised before then, but then you'd be talking 2030 before we do that revision. And I see that's probably the higher probability than doing a revision.
With these changes, in light of changes that can be expected and maybe different interpretations of the changes and applying them into an organization, can you share some examples of current challenges faced by these quality and regulatory teams with changes and revisions, and how are companies best to address them?
Well, I think to me, a big problem happens to be that people are trying to be a word based, I'll say, and they'll look at the words and they'll say this word changed or that word changed. And so that can cause you to be, I'll say, hypersensitive. Um, we just talked about some of the things that shall consider. So, 9001, I can talk, some of the changes. So you're going to see a change from maintain and retain to say things like kept as documented information for use versus kept as documented information as evidence. And so you'll see some of these like minor changes in wording, and people will take that as a change in the standard. Well, no, there's still just documents and records, things that we're keeping to be able to use and make something happen versus keeping something as evidence, right? And so you'll see those changes, and people might focus on those changes. Don't look at the changes in the words. Look for where there's changes in intent, right? Um, rather, and keep those as your focus. I'll just, again, in 1345, as the U.S. transitions to the QMSR, um, I look at, people would focus on that the FDA will now require a quality manual. I'm like, well, they already required planning. So what were you doing for planning before? And can't you just use that as your quality manual, or at least the structure of your quality manual? So these are the same, why I'm saying that's not really a change in intent. It's just a change in the words of that are there. And this is a struggle with some auditors as well. Many auditors will focus on the words that are there rather than the intent that's behind all of these things. And so, I mean, that's where organizations are struggling and have struggled in the past, is they have an auditor that's focused on those words rather than an auditor that's focused on what's the intent. Um, the way that most organizations probably can get around that is ask the auditor to first of all outline where they're finding the requirement. That's always a valid question. You should never say an auditor is wrong. Just say, for understanding, can you show me the requirement, and where the requirement is coming from? And then the second part of that would be, well, what's the risk if I don't follow those words exactly? And am I still meeting, and then you can start looking at what's the intent behind those words. And that helps most organizations then understand, what they can do or what they should be doing.
I'd like to go a little broader within the industry, switch a little bit to AI, right? AI is everywhere. It's a part of just about every business, or will be. It's sticking around, and it's, can be useful in many different ways. What do you think of AI and machine learning, and how these technologies are reshaping quality systems and compliance, especially like in life sciences?
Well, so first of all, I'm going to say that AI is not brand new. It's existed for decades. And so what I would say is that the broad availability of AI through ChatGPT, through all these other apps and stuff like that, is one of the things that's become available, or more available. And to me, I would be cautionary, particularly as you work in the regulatory and quality space, that the databases that the artificial intelligence is drawing from, that data that's behind its answers, really needs to be scrutinized. Make sure that, if you're looking for information about your organization, you should closely control that data that's behind it so that it gives you an answer that's tailored to your organization. A couple of things on AI. You need to know the data that it's drawing from, that the data that's it's given is, applicable to the things. Second of all, you need to be able to still look at it and say, you know, and basically check it in another way so that you're getting an answer.
Like in all things, you got to use the right tool, right?
Yeah.
And there are general AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and all these other ones that are coming out. And to me, that's like asking an average person on the street your regulatory question. They might have an opinion because they've heard something, but you don't know if that's vetted correctly. Versus companies like Intellect and other EQMS vendors and regulatory intelligence systems vendors are creating more targeted AI, right? Where, to Mark's point, then they are controlling the population of information that it is trained to, so that it's not just grabbing stuff off of Wikipedia and Joe's regulatory blog or something, that's unsubstantiated information. So I think ChatGPT has its role, like Mark said, and it's a good place to start and like help me understand, outline how I might approach this problem.
Right. And so those of us that have actually gone in and started using AI, and we use it on a pretty routine basis, and then understand how to use that tool appropriately, are the people that are going to be successful in using it. So those are the things that I would say. This goes, the number one thing that comes up with AI, machine learning in medical devices in the industry itself is the first word that will come up is bias. And that's really what we're talking about. It just has a bias to use information from certain sources. And so you need to be careful about that.
So for the industry as a whole, we've talked about, regulatory changes that might be coming up. We just talked about AI. What do you think is the next big disruption or transformation in quality systems management that quality professionals really need to keep their eye on?
To me, the big piece is going to be our continued move towards integrated management systems. So the ability to take your quality management system and integrate it with information security, with environmental, with all of these other pieces.
With your
Um,
business management system.
yeah, your business, yeah, your overall business management system. Quality professionals are going to need to have a better understanding of the big picture and how these things all work together. I think that's going to be critical for success as a quality professional, regulatory professional, that you understand how this affects the business and how it gets integrated with all of these other pieces. And I think that's a piece that's going to be coming too from ISO. I know that they're working on an integrated management system guidance document to help people understand how to put these things together. But I think the most successful people will be people that understand that big picture and how these pieces all fit together, and they're not just focused on what do I need to do in my quality management system. You need to understand, how does your quality management system affect the business? How does it affect the environmental management piece? How does it affect all of these things? And then be able to, again, come back and I'll say, apply that risk-based approach to understand, which one's going to win here.
I think it has, if you're familiar with the terms quality 4.0 and industry 4.0, I think it's like Mark said, it's an integration of those, a merger of those things, right? Where it's going to become, more of a universe, in terms of the ecosystem. Um, but I do think AI is going to be a significant impactor. I think more and more EQMS tools like Intellect, we're going to see that not just an ability to do AI-based queries in there, but that it starts to kind of play a partner role, right? So you go into the change control module and you want to initiate a change request, and the systems will probably start eventually doing things like going, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but this change is already, something similar to this change was already done 5 years ago, right? That stuff that for humans is just really hard to say unless you want to spend a couple hours digging through stuff. You probably should, but you don't have the time. First step is, can you query the system and say, hey, has anything like this been done before? The next step will be, will it be more proactive and go, the change you're about the request has already been done, or it's going to conflict with these three other changes that were put in place because of these kappas or these non-conformances. So you shouldn't proceed, right? And so you will get some better decision making out of that. But
And if
again, it
it
all
is,
ties back to the data, right? To drive it.
and don't forget about changing these 5 other documents that are associated with this that have some in additional pieces.
Yep.
And here's the testing that has been done in the past. So,
You'll have to redo this, right? If you go
redo
through this
these
change,
pieces.
right? Yeah.
All of those things, as AI continues to evolve and has the right information, that it can identify those things for us and help us be better. I mean, understand all of the moving pieces, right? And that kind of goes back again to seeing the big picture. You can see it all rather than just seeing your little piece of it.
Does that end up where in an organization there's more interdepartmental connectivity joint
Absolutely.
decision making. I mean, there should be already, right? But it's
Yeah.
almost even more important now, it seems, with these changes in standards and with all this data that needs to be integrated.
Correct. And having the right roles identified and all that kind of stuff, you know, the system can help you identify who else needs to be involved in these things. Okay,
All right.
great.
Well, yeah, thank you. This is very informative. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience will as well. We'll provide your contact information in case anyone wants to connect with QRx Partners and utilize your consulting services. Hope to have one or both of you again back with Intellect at a future presentation.
Anytime.
Always appreciate our partnership. Thank you both, and we'll see everybody later. Thanks.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.